is Angie, and this is my story about having and raising 3 children on the autism spectrum. Autism is a neurodevelopmental condition that has lifelong effects and can be recognized from early childhood. It can be severe to mild, similar to other conditions such as acne or diabetes. It can also not be noticeable and then flare up. It is primarily characterized by difficulties with interaction, communication, and often repetitive patterns of thought and behavior. When my kids were 6 years old, 4 years old, and the youngest not quite 2, we discovered within a 5-month period that all 3 of them were on the autism spectrum. It was a shock. I remember feeling disbelief, sadness, grief, and unsure about what that would mean for their future. I had been asking different people questions about what I thought were strange behaviors and the fact that my discipline efforts were not going very well. I had several books, like a lot of people do, on discipline and parenting that I've been referring to. Apart from my youngest, they had always been on track for milestones. My older 2 learned to talk very early. But knowing why there were some oddities and behavioral difficulties was actually a relief. It explained why things had been so hard, and with a new direction to go into, I went into research mode. I remember people thinking that it was strange and amazing that my oldest at age 2 knew all of the alphabet, upper and lowercase. I used to think that maybe nobody really reads books to their kids that often. Move on. He could also count past 200. It was difficult to get him to listen to me, however. As a baby, he was rarely content unless being held and didn't really sleep much until the age of 2. He would overreact to the point of physical aggression, especially when somebody else had been wronged. In 1st grade, I had to carry him out of school for an hour after class was over with, screaming because he hadn't been allowed to finish his schoolwork. My middle child, as a baby, would start screaming in stores like Miners or Target for what seemed to be no apparent reason. And I finally noticed a pattern that anytime a child was crying anywhere in the store, it could have been far away, that they just started screaming. This same child, as a toddler, ran up to a poor Martin's stock boy, and screamed, "Don't take me!" and then promptly ran back to my side. Also, same child during a preschool music performance at a pew-filled church ran over to the pianist, who was also the preschool teacher, and screamed, "Start over," repeatedly because one of the other preschoolers had sang the wrong words. I had to go up onto the stage and carry them off, screaming all the while as we left the sanctuary. I learned quickly that these behavioral issues stemmed from real biological and neurological differences. People with autism often process sensory input and output differently. This in turn affects emotional regulation and thus behavior issues sometimes. To complicate the issue further for us, 2 years after we figured everyone was on the spectrum, it was revealed that all 3 kids also had epilepsy. Once stabilized though, this helped not only with their behavior but their focus as well. On top of being on the spectrum, they weren't always catching what was being said or what was going on. Originally, it appeared that my youngest was going to be what was considered classic autistic. But after we got his seizure meds where they needed to be, he became much more like a typical obnoxious 4-year-old. It became clear that he had high-functioning autism, like his older siblings. I only wish I had known the signs to look for much earlier, because they were there. The same 4-year-old, when he was 6, happened to answer a square root question that somebody asked. And when I asked him who had told him about square roots, he told me The clock told me, and proceeded to lead me inside to where we had a math clock on the wall and explained how we figured it out. Years later, I went back to double check those books that I had on discipline and parenting because I didn't recall reading anything about what to do if nothing was working. There was no mention of possible seizure disorders or even, attention deficit disorder. Only one of those books made a vague reference way in the back to, maybe you should check in with a professional. I wish those books had also included other bits of advice for families with difficult children, like the importance of self-care for the adults, to go to marriage counseling to learn better strategies for dealing with stress. The statistic for divorce with just one child with special needs has not changed since then. It's over 80%. My kids are incredibly bright and have always loved to learn. They all basically taught themselves to read. I would refer to one of them as my dictionary and the other two as my calculators. Getting them to understand why they needed to behave a certain way in certain situations was the challenge. We had a lot of great times and still do. Life with them is a bit like living with Sheldon from Big Bang Theory. The hardest part for me was people's disbelief in what they assumed that they knew. This is 20 years ago, and the general public's knowledge about autism was not like it is now. I had some family members that flat out did not believe us, said the school was making everything up, and places like First Steps were just trying to get money out of us. There were even teachers that, though they had a great reputation for working with children, didn't seem to be able to work with mine or even believe a diagnosis. It was hard for me to deal with people's perception of what kind of a parent I was. I know most people thought that I simply never disciplined my kids, that I was a bad parent who couldn't follow through with the consequence or say no. If anything, I was often too hard on my kids. I tended to be an authoritative parent, especially early on, but I was determined to make them the best versions of themselves that they could be. I tried to do as many social activities as possible, Reigns of Life, preschool, soccer, Notre Dame special needs programs, play dates, Sunday school, to name a few. When your dinosaur-loving 6-year-old, who knows what most of the geological time periods are, yells out, "The Bible is wrong!" during a creation explanation, it kind of makes you rethink your life choices. I actually started a science club for first graders to join my oldest's love of astronomy with other peers, only to have the person who promised to watch my younger two and take her first grader along bail on me because one of mine was too difficult to watch for 2 hours. So I brought them with me and did the club anyway. 60 kids showed up or signed up, but I was exhausted a lot. For many years, I felt like I was addressing catastrophic outbursts. 2 of my kids have what I like to refer to as opposing sensory issues. One would make different noises repeatedly, like tongue clicking or persistent meowing, and the other one had a low tolerance for hearing this and would overreact. Noisemaker would be asked to stop and then forget a few minutes later, or sometimes I think learn that it annoyed the other one. But this is actually a form of stemming that can reduce anxiety. The most common form that you may have heard of is kids flapping their hands, but it can come in many varieties. But one day I caught myself severely reprimanding the noisemaker right off the bat. They weren't doing anything wrong, but I was trying to prevent a catastrophic event. Kind of felt like I was always punishing my kids. And for a while, I would flinch at loud noises. The hardest part for me raising my kids wasn't them. Okay, sometimes it was, but it was dealing with hurt feelings. I would get dirty looks from people in stores. Kids from school would tell me that their mom told them that my kids were just spoiled. At family gatherings, I would come back from using the restroom to find one of my kids doing something crazy and inappropriate, and all the adults were just staring at them. I had one experience at the 4-H fair where I let one of my kids try to get on a ride without me assisting. They were old enough to do so, but had some anxiety about doing it for reasons I don't remember. We went through the process on a couple different rides. While I was standing there waiting for all the kids to come back, a woman came up to me and told me what a good job I did. That threw me. It ended up that she worked with kids on the spectrum and recognized what was going on. I knew I was handling everything the right way, but to have someone acknowledge what was going on and then to tell me I was doing a good job, I don't know if anybody had ever said that to me. It made me realize how alone I felt and how desperate I was for approval myself. I wish people were more capable of wondering why somebody acts a certain way instead of just assuming that they know what's going on. My kids have been and continue to be a treasure in my life. Parenting them is just a little different than most people's experience. They're all on the road to being independent. They still have their ups and downs like anybody else. I wish people would realize that autism is a developmental delay disorder. They can be very advanced in one thing, like astronomy, and yet be 7 years or more behind in some other area. My experience eventually made me a better parent and a better person, I think. It's taught me to accept people for who they are and to try to see how they see the world, not the only way I perceive it.